Doctors and nurses of Reddit, have you ever witnessed a couple have a child that was obviously not the father's? If so, what happened? Similar, but I don't know where else to put it because it just makes me laugh. My aunt is a nurse in the maternity ward. She had a couple come in where they were both very black. Lady has baby and it is white AF. Like, totally pale. No trace of any pigment. They put the baby on her mom and the mom starts yelling about how this isn't her baby and they stole her baby. In all fairness, you can be very confused during after delivery. It wasn't stupidity, just sobbing and freaking out, and the father is just sitting there and looks very confused because even he's realizing that even if she did cheat, there is no way the baby would be that white. The doctor and nurses are trying to assure her that this is her baby and the skin usually darkens later. Come to find out, when he called his mom, she pointed out that they have a second cousin who is albino and maybe baby got that gene. Turns out that's what happened, baby was albino. My fiance's father is almost certainly not his biological dad. His mom was just a genuinely terrible human being who didn't even try to hide the fact she was cheating. But his dad loved him from the second he was born, and when the mom decided 4 years later she just didn't want the kid anymore, she just gave him to his dad and rode off. Jay's dad ended up getting married and they tried for kids before finding out his sperm count was too low to ever father children. They ended up adopting many years later. He sat my fiancé down when my fiancé was 13 and told him the truth, and that if Jay wanted to test they would, but it was up to him. Jay cried and told him he just wanted him to be his dad, and that was the end of that. Edit. I originally had put real dad instead of biological dad. Changed it when several people pointed out that the man who raised him is most certainly his real dad. I worked as a lab tech before I became a nurse. We had a set of twins in the NICU that were super early and the mom was still in the OR getting sewed up from the cesarean. I was drawing baby B's blood when mom was wheeled over to baby A's isolate. She was crying and said, "Oh, thank God you're not black. I have been so worried the last 7 months." So newborn babies, especially when they're born early, are very pink, almost red. So even if a baby was part black, their skin isn't necessarily dark yet. But looking at these babies, it was obvious they were going to be black. The shape of the face, the texture of the hair, and baby B that I was working on had an intense Mongolian spot. A few weeks later, my NICU nurse friend told me that the babies were now on a no info status, meaning security alert. Can't give anyone information about them. Can't refer to them by name, etc. She said there was a huge fight because the mom's husband, white guy, obviously noticed that the babies were half black and that mom had cheated on him and got pregnant. The real dad, black guy, came in and didn't realize the mom was even married. Those poor babies. O circumflex Y with diaresis copyright airing. I had a vasectomy. While chatting with the doctor, he told me about another patient. This guy had 3 kids and came in for the snip because he and his wife decided they were done having children. The doc opened up his sack and found nothing to snip. This guy was born without the ability to have any children. The poor doctor had to explain to him what happened. Imagine finding that out that way. I had the opposite happen. Sort of. My wife and I are both brown skinned, dark haired, half Mexicans, and our moms are both 100% white blondes with blue and green eyes. So we sort of knew it was a crapshoot with our baby. But the nurse who was assisting with delivery had no idea. At one point she gets sort of nervous and calls for help, and another, I guess more senior nurse came in and nodded and came over to talk to me. I thought there was something wrong with the baby as she comes over and stumbles through some questions. So I was the father and no one else was coming, etc. Then finally she awkwardly asks if either of us happened to be blonde growing up. I said yeah I was, and both the baby's grandparents are blonde as they come, and this wave of relief went over her and she brought me over to see this blonde as hell crowning baby head. It's funny because he looks just like me if you applied a gringo Instagram filter. We often get awkward questions about his heritage and my wife always hits them with "yo, we're not sure if he's mine." It's always funny to see people nod for a moment and then go "wait, what?" I know a girl who was pregnant with her boyfriend's best friend's baby. He found out there was a possibility about a week before she gave birth. I went up to see her once he was born and he looked just like the friend. There was no question. I broke the news to her boyfriend and he was absolutely devastated. His parents were heartbroken and super pissed. They had bought the girl everything she needed, including a $500 car seat stroller set. She refused to give anything back. She started up a relationship with the friend immediately after having their child, and they're still together a decade later. But the kicker for me has always been that the boyfriend and best friend were next door neighbors. She moved into his house after coming home from the hospital, so her ex-boyfriend and his family had to see them basically every day raising this child that they had believed to be his for the entire pregnancy. I can't even imagine. Edit. Yes. They did a DNA test right after he was born. The baby was the friend's. Not a doctor nurse, but my ex-girlfriend delivered a baby while I was in the delivery room, and turns out it wasn't mine. She was 16. I was 15. All along I was under the impression that this kid was mine, and time to be an adult. Took all the classes, read the books, worked every night weekend to save whatever money I could as a 15-year-old. I finally get a call she is in labor, so I have somebody rush me to the ER. Luckily for her, it wasn't a long labor, only about 6 hours. But there was a complication. The baby came out with the umbilical cord wrapped around its neck. Doctor assured us it was going to be okay, but the nurses were prepping for things to go south. Baby comes out. It's a light shade of purple, and the nurses immediately take the baby and put on the smallest mask you have ever saw, to help it get oxygen, I guess. I was too panicked to ask a lot of questions. They state they need to keep the baby on watch overnight, so I stay in the room with the ex. The next evening, baby is back in the room with us, and all seems well. The ex is asleep, and the same nurse from the night before comes into the room and beckons me out. She states that at risk of her losing her job, she has to break some harsh news to me. That kid is not mine. She stated that while at this stage it wasn't obvious, over the next few weeks it would become clear this kid was mixed, and since both of us were white, it was a high probability that it wasn't mine. Cue a mixed bag of emotions, and me promptly waking the ex to get a little clarification. Come to find out, she knew the chances, and was just hoping it was mine because it worked better for her. Apparently her father was old school racist and she didn't want to have to deal with that. I left the hospital to collect my thoughts, and a few weeks later was served with child support papers, one DNA test, and about 6 weeks later, I am 0.0% that kid's father. Wherever that nurse is now, I hope your life is amazing. I understand that you were not supposed to get involved in the personal side of things, and keep it professional, but you saved me a lot of additional headache. I'm a nurse, but this didn't happen to me. Friend of mine got pregnant in high school. She claimed it was our local doctor's son's kid, so he agreed to deliver his grandchild for free. Child delivered, and it was obviously half African American. Doctor's son and girl were both white. I think he still delivered it for free as he was relieved his 14-year-old son wasn't a dad. Edit. Forgotten apostrophe. The doctor didn't impregnate a teenager. It was supposedly his son's kid. It wasn't. Had a lesbian couple come in. One of them was pregnant. Neither knew. Judging from all the screaming, this information was poorly received. Random note from the side of academia. This is why they don't do blood tests compared to your parents in my college, Marshall University, to teach basic genetics. Too many were finding out they didn't have any chance of being their father's child. I only heard the horror stories secondhand, but the results spoke for themselves. I used to work with a guy whose wife was pregnant. Near time for delivery, everyone at our place of business had a big party with gifts, money, etc. So big day comes. Water breaks. They get in car to go to hospital. She breaks the news on the way there it's not his. The kid is another race. And if he could just drop her off at the hospital and then leave, that would be great. He took a few days off work, found a new apartment, moved out, filed divorce etc. He called into work and told someone what happened. News spread pretty fast. All congratulations cards, etc. were cleaned up and thrown away. Everyone was very sensitive to his pain, except, somehow, I don't know how, I did not get the news. So on his first day back, I walked into the office he shared with 6-7 other guys and said, hey daddy-o, how's fatherhood so far? Getting any sleep? Got some pictures? Let's see the little tyke. He slowly lifted his head to look at me with a painful look. The room was dead silent. One of his workmates stood up, grabbed my arm and walked me out of the room, shushing me. "What happened?" I asked. "Did it die? What's the problem?" When he told me I about died myself. I still feel bad for the dude and it's been 30 years. Oh man. I'm so late to this thread. I used to work in the newborn nursery at a hospital. We got the babies right from delivery, cleaned them up, footprinted them, checked vitals, etc. Dads usually came in with the newborns. This dad comes in with this baby. Dad is white. Mom is white. Baby is very obviously not white. The dad was very quiet standing next to this baby, watching us clean it up. He says quietly, "I don't think this is my baby." You could tell he was absolutely devastated. We advised him not to sign the birth certificate until he was sure. Not sure what happened after we sent the baby back out to mom, but I felt awful for the guy. Had a college buddy whose fiancée was pregnant. They were the perfect couple. Both had just over a year with great careers starting out. Everything was butterflies and rainbows. Fast forward to the delivery room. They're in there and out comes a very black baby. He's quite the pale redhead. And she's a blonde blue eyes Texas girl. He made sure everyone was okay, waited for her parents to arrive, and left without saying a word. He moved all his stuff out of the house while she was in the hospital, and cut off all communications with her. Just walked out of their lives in the most stone cold act I'd ever seen. They were together for 9 years, and he just left cold turkey. She tried to contact him at his job a few times, but he quickly moved up the ladder and eventually got a job in another city. He told me once that he took solace in the fact that her family had already dropped about $10K in a wedding that never happened. Edited typo. Happened to my fiancé registered sinus mom. His mom is a labor and delivery nurse. One time she had a patient whose parents were present during her stay at the hospital. The staff there have a whiteboard with some general information about the patients like blood type, time spent in the wing, and like how far along. This information is nameless for HIPAA reasons and instead has a patient's number. So this patient happened to be the only one in the wing at the time. Her father was walking back from the cafeteria at one point and noticed the board. He stopped one of the nurses and asked if the blood type for the patient on the board was correct. He knew his daughter was the only patient there. It was B+. The nurse confirmed it was correct. Turns out he knew his and his wife's blood type. He was O+ and his wife was A. This combination will never yield a B+ baby. He brings his wife out and just points at the board and this look of shock washes over her. TL. Doctor father of patient in labor finds out his wife cuckolded him 25 years later by knowing his blood type Punnett squares. I'm not a nurse. My professor was a land nurse and she once saw a man running between 2 delivery rooms. Both women he had impregnated went into labor and gave birth the same day. Supposedly the one he was married to was angry because the woman he cheated with was impregnated after the wife but had her kid 10 minutes before the wife. Land is apparently the most drama-filled section of hospitals. My so is planning to be a nurse and he's going to work in land neonatal this year and I'm excited to hear any dramatic stories. My best friend was dating a girl and knocked her up. They got engaged and planned to get married right after the baby was born. There were about 10 of us in the waiting room waiting for her to crank out the baby. It was essentially her parents. His were in another state. Some of her friends, and some of ours. After sitting there for about 2 hours, he walks out with a smirk on his face and says let's go. We all thought something horrible had happened. Her friends ask how the baby is, and he said fine, but black. He motioned for us to go, so we followed him. In the parking garage, he tells us to follow him to his apartment, then sends me a text asking I could put him up for a while. We literally moved him out of his apartment and into my spare bedroom in like an hour tops. Her parents didn't know who to be mad at. The confusion on their faces when he told them the baby was black was priceless. My grandmother was a nurse. Once she was assisting with delivering a baby and the ostensible father commented that the child looked good for a premature baby. Without thinking my grandmother told the truth. That baby is not premature. So I guess I know where I get my social obliviousness from. Worked in the army hospital on Ft. Lewis. A woman came in for belly pain and we found out and told her she was 10 weeks pregnant. The husband at the bedside started laughing, grabbed his coat and left the room, explaining to us that he had been in Afghanistan until 3 weeks prior. He looked back at her and just said, "Well, that's that Brittany." I always liked how classily he left her while she just silently stared off into space. I work in anesthesia. One of my colleagues had someone really deliver a baby with Steve's lunchbox tattooed above the birth canal. The OB-GYN said to the father after the delivery, "Congratulations, Steve." The guy replied that his name was indeed not Steve. Don't know if that counts. Not quite what you're asking, but in the same vein. I'm a nurse in a level 4 neonatal ICU. We service the sickest of the sick from our state and the surrounding states, so we see it all. We had a baby that was sick as snot. Lo and behold, we discovered its blood spinal fluid, etc., was septic with herpes. In most babies, we avoid this by treating the herpes while the mom is pregnant. In this case, the mom didn't even know she was a carrier. So where did it come from? This is the awkward and sickening moment when everyone in the room realized where the herpes came from. Turns out, the father had an affair and contracted the virus from his lover. So yeah, while this woman's baby is on the verge of death, she finds out her husband has been cheating on her and his cheatiness is the reason their baby is sick. My son came out and looked really tan. My ex-girlfriend and I are pretty white. I thought for a second she cheated on me. We are now separated for different reasons unrelated to our child. And he is pasty white as hell. Got one heck of a suntan in the uterus though. My wife is an RN hospital supervisor. Code yellow is the code over the intercom for security. Large male nurses needed. It rarely ever happens, but every now and then over the speakers you hear a code yellow. Labor and delivery.